Welcome to Parahumans. Today's topic, power classification and ratings. Before I begin, I will note that this will dabble into late worm and Ward era spoilers, along with general Parahumans verse knowledge, as powers are a core plot piece in the series. Also, this will be a broad overview of the different types of powers in the setting. If people are interested, I can consider doing a full deep dive analysis on each individual power class in the future. Wildbow's Patreons and the links to each web serial will be in the description below, along with links to the Google Docs and the Parahumans Wiki. I would never have been able to have made this without the support of the Wiki, so thank you very much for that. Please support Wildbow and his official publications. Now with all that being said, let's get on with the video. Parahumans versus Capes. Starting off with a small section, it should be noted that there is a difference between the terms Capes and Parahumans, though they are often used interchangeably. Despite this, Parahumans refers to all people with powers. Capes refers to people who go out in part of the superhero, supervillain, and rogue trifecta of society. People without powers can be Capes, but they cannot be Parahumans. You can be a Parahuman without being a Cape. Power classes. Now, power classes are not an inherently original idea in and of themselves. Technically, Marvel Comics has differentiators between mutants, mutates, inhumans, and magic. DC Comics has metahumans, mutants, not the same as Marvel, and magic. They just aren't in a strict placement category and study, owing to the vast fantasy kitchen sink setting that these comics are in. Though with mutants you do get subclassifications like the beta to omega levels of power. And mutates sometimes get differentiated between a mutate like Spider-Man compared to a gamma mutate, or like Captain America is called a mutate varies based on opinion from what I've seen. And power classes coming from a singular source but are also placed in categories is also not new. My Hero Academia has a system for quirks involving 5 categories as well. However, the system for what quirks are gained seem to be random beyond following family genetics. What makes Parahumans classification so unique is that the powers are gained through a combination of singular power source and character psychology. Powers are granted to humans through a connection to a shard, an alien god virus that studies a human host for potentially years for connecting to their brains during a moment called a trigger event. Generally considered to be near the worst moments of their host's lives, the shards connect to the human mind and scans the world around them, and other shards for extra data. Once that flash of a moment passes, the human host is given a power or powers that is influenced by their personality, external circumstance, and data of other shards nearby, and thus a parahuman is born. Alright, so let's say you are the fortunate or unfortunate parahuman question. What are the class options? Well, let's just say there's a lot to choose from. Movers. Movers are parahumans born from a trigger event where the host was in dire need of escaping the situation or chasing a goal. Being hounded by an angry mob right on your heels, having to run while someone is shooting at your feet, or leaping to a handhold with a 200-meter fall beneath your feet, and failing could all be examples of mover triggers. These tend to create movement-based powers, flight, teleportation, super speed, enhanced movement reflexes, enhanced jumps, and even portals on occasion. It should be noted that being a mover does not immediately grant you the category of speedster in the community, and there are hot debates about whether flying at certain levels of speed counts as a speedster as well. Let me know in the comments down below what you think counts as a speedster. Shaker. Shakers are parahumans born of environmental conflicts, often where the host perceives the area and people within it as the source of their issues, consciously or subconsciously. A nightmarishly horrific divorced family forced to stay in one house together and use a child to win legal disputes, or being trapped in a cage underwater surrounded by sharks, or realizing that the entire student body has seen your leaked nudes and has years worth of blackmail are all examples of something that can lead to shaker triggers. These shaker powers tend to be about manipulating the environment and using it as a vector for their powers. Summoning hands out of the ground, creating a defensive hurricane to deflect projectiles, or transforming part of reality into their own personal pocket dimension are some examples of potential shaker powers. Brute. Brutes are parahumans born of physical harm, conflict, and trauma that often, but not always, does damage. Having your face be cut up by a mugger, trapped under a collapsed car and having your chest compressed, or accidentally bringing something metal into your MRI machine can all be examples of brute triggers. These brute powers tend to amount to making a host tougher, stronger, and more survivable, though not necessarily all three. Examples such as turning your arms into truck-sized barrels of muscle, having regenerative metallic bone skin for armor, or having skin-tight hyperdensity for 60 seconds can all be types of brute powers. As mentioned before, while brutes can be tough, plus strong, plus more survivable, there can be cases where a brute is tough but not strong, or is tough and strong but can't regenerate, or can regenerate and be strong but not tough, and so on and so forth. Which one would you prefer? Breaker. Breakers are parahumans born from more abstract physical and mental combinations, sometimes leading to physical and mental influences by the power itself, which causes them to enter a state of altered or alien reality on a physical level. Someone staying up for 96 hours straight and combating their hallucinations while desperately pleading for help, or being poisoned by a lover over a great period of time, where you remain lucid for brief periods of hospital stays, or your body being calm under anesthesia, but your mind fully aware, can all be examples of breaker triggers. Breaker powers tend to be reality-bending or physics-breaking in nature, sometimes having a breaker form of the state that the parahuman needs to transform into, act as a vector for additional powers. A man who turns into a dragon made of lightning, a girl who unfolds into a living and breathing floating alien castle with turrets and defenses, or someone who unfolds into 3 ghosts with a focus on sound, sight, and hearing for each one, can all be examples of breaker triggers. Master. Master parahumans tend to be born of events where the host has lost control of the people or social aspect of the environment around them, be it through death, trauma, or being outcast. A local celebrity realizing that he's been placed under involuntary conservatorship and having that be abused, or someone taking care of an animal rescue is unable to stop a deadly sickness from spreading to each and every animal, or finding yourself stuck in a loveless marriage with someone who makes it plain as day that they will never let you move on, are all possible examples of master triggers. These master powers tend to be some measure of influence, subterfuge, or direct control of people, minions, in some form or another, with a wide array of vectors. A woman summons ice sculptors of ancient warriors that follow her every order. Someone else creates a single meat puppet that they share every sense with. Or a man can howl and force every animal in hearing distance to attack his enemies. These can all be examples of master powers. It should be noted that master powers also include emotional manipulation, such as love beams or bursts of crippling anxiety at a glance. Tinkers. Tinker parahumans tend to be born from months or years long worth of build-up, culminating into a moment where they are presented with a problem without any solution. Dealing with substance abuse for years before being shamed at your lowest point, without any recourse, trying to manage a business to support your local neighborhood, but the people of that neighborhood sabotaging you, or raising a child with developmental disorders and getting nothing but scorn from fellow parents despite your best efforts, can be examples of tinker triggers. Tinker powers tend to be the most wide-ranging in terms of variety and flexibility, with many different methodologies, specialties, and growth of super advanced technology. A woman who builds power armor that eats oxygen, or a child who can use remotes to alter gravity, or someone who injects serums for jellyfish mutations, can all be examples of tinker powers. It should be noted that despite being able to build advanced technology, tinkers are not necessarily super intelligent. Beyond the fact that intelligence is ambiguous of a criteria in general, tinkers can run the gamut of having great knowledge of many sciences and beyond, or having only a specific knowledge relating to their particular tinker focus, such as black holes or mushrooms, or even have no knowledge at all and merely enter into a fugue state to rely entirely on instinct for use. Tinker tech does not tend to be reproducible by non-tinkers, barring power assistance or having the tech be incredibly dumbed down, and barely super tech by the tinker themselves. Blaster. Blaster parahumans tend to be created in situations where the host is in the path of oncoming danger, but not necessarily harmed at the moment of trigger. Being trapped in an alleyway as a local serial killer takes his time approaching you, or being at the bottom of a dance floor, looking up to see the chandelier about to fall on you, or a horde of hungry dogs appear at the horizon coming straight at you, are all possible examples of blaster triggers. Blasters are ranged powers that take on the form of bullets, waves, beams, pillars, and more, and often come with an effect tied to the projectile on impact. Someone who can launch out orbs of rubber, emit cryo beams from their eyes, or vomit up magma like a tidal wave are all possible examples of blaster powers. The Thinker. Parahumans are typically caused by sudden, cumulative emotional and mental stress over a short period of time, typically within hours or days. The sudden realization that your parent is the notorious serial killer, agonizing frustration at your failure to reconcile with your bully victim, or intense focus on completing a task only to suddenly realize it's put you on a fatal direction, can be all examples of thinker triggers. Thinker powers are abilities that grant extraordinary senses or knowledge, enhancing the parahuman's mental abilities to a heightened extent. A parahuman who can see the statistics of anyone they deem hostile, another who can smell emotions across the city, or someone who can see the past and future of any room they look into, can all be expressions of thinker powers. Combat thinkers are a subset of thinkers who excel in physical combat, often having enhanced reflexes as a minor boon to their abilities. Someone who can see electrical signals in the human body and punch the precise place to send you into paralysis would be one example of a combat thinker. It should be noted that much like tinkers, while some thinkers' powers can increase intelligence, this is not the majority for cases of many parahumans. Strikers. Strikers are parahumans that often come from immediate threats in close proximity, be it a person, place, or thing that is usually singular in nature. A bomb in your hands that you can't get rid of as it counts down, your dog dying in your arms as rabies consumes its mind, or facing a gladiator in an arena who clearly outclasses you in every way can be examples of striker triggers. Strikers tend to emanate powers or influence reality through physical contact, not necessarily by hand alone, but even through hair or full body touch. A parahuman who can turn every object they touch into robots, another who can slice through steel with kicks, or a parahuman that can give any human extra flesh by hugging them, can be examples of striker powers. Changers are parahumans that often come from crises in identity, physical limitations, aesthetic issues, and exploration of self. A human with a full body brace tips over and agonizes over his life. A child who delved too far into the looks-maxing trend and now is suffering ailments. Or someone who tattooed the love of their life onto their skin only to be betrayed in a personal way can be examples of changer triggers. Changers tend to have full body or partial body transformations that severely alter the parahuman's appearance. A parahuman who can transform into a flock or herd of animals, another who can become a giant of muscle, a parahuman that can expand the skin to barbed tentacles, can be examples of changer powers. Trumps are parahumans that often come from incidents involving other parahumans, power effects, or intense personal focus on parahumans. These powers are typically only planned for important individuals in the system, so as few as 2.78% to 4.17% of parahumans are full-blown trumps. A person being hounded by a parahuman serial killer, a child stuck in a time warp caused by a parahuman fight, or someone who has stalked a superhero for years only to be firmly rejected, can be examples of trump triggers. Trumps tend to be about manipulating, altering, boosting, creating, and negating powers in others or themselves. A parahuman who can eat powered attacks to grow more and more resistant, another who gives anyone he sees super senses and reflexes, or a parahuman that can use new powers depending on lack of sleep, can be examples of trump powers. Strangers are parahumans that often come from wanting to escape unwanted attention, to vanish under scrutiny, or separate themselves from the focus. A person being surrounded by a gang wanting an easy target, a man dreading the approaching footsteps of an abusing partner, or someone being shouted out and down by a large crowd of mockery, can be examples of stranger triggers. Strangers tend to be about infiltration and messing with perception and stealth. A parahuman who can sink into people's shadows to hide and be carried, another who can only be seen but never remembered, or a parahuman that enhances light all around them into blinding levels, can be examples of stranger powers. Additionals. It should be noted that it is rare for any individual to have a power that only fits into one category. Oftentimes you'll have parahumans with multiple powers, the power of multiple effects, or a power being used in a way outside of intended use. These examples include hybrids. Hybrids are parahumans with a power category that has two or more aspects irrevocably linked, and are designated with a slash. For example, Dauntless is a striker/trump. He empowers his weapons by touch with charges that slowly gives him unique abilities that only he can use, growing stronger over time. Here's another example, Mover/Shaker, a parahuman that carries the environment around them when they teleport, merging with a new destination to create new hazards or resupply their teammates. Hybrids are generally the most common parahuman type out there, as powers tend to cross the boundaries of categories in application. Subrated powers. Subrated powers are when a power has side effects or applications that belong in another category, not separate powers in themselves. These are typically represented with brackets. An example of this would be Snubnose as a blaster, (brute). An example of this would be Stemnose as a blaster (brute), a parahuman who creates short-range bursts of sparks that have powerful concussive force, and uses these sparks constantly to move an impossibly dense set of heavy armor supplemental powers. Supplemental powers are minor abilities that support the main power or powers of the parahuman, often for protection of the user or aiding in power use. These abilities are connected to the powers and not separate from them. An example of this would be Golem, a striker/shaker that can create limbs out of whatever material he touches. His supplemental power was being able to sense all of the same material he touches in a small citywide area, which could grant him a striker/shaker (thinker) rating. Here's another example. Brute with shockwave punches, with a supplemental ability to reduce shockwaves within close proximity to his body. Now, this parahuman would still retain the singular brute category, it does not actually change or alter any abilities. Multi-powers. Multi-powers are situations where a parahuman just tends to have more than one power, not connected to each other in any way. These tend to be represented with a simple comma between categories. One example is Hatchet Face as a trump, brute. He has two independent powers from each other. A power dampening aura that increases in close proximity, which is his trump power, and an enhanced physical durability and strength to handle steamrollers, the brute power. Another example might be a parahuman who builds electric whips and who has the power to duplicate child versions of themselves. This would be a tinker, master. Clusters. Cluster parahumans occur when multiple parahumans trigger in close proximity around the same time. Clusters can range from 2 to 6 parahumans, resulting in parahumans with multiple powers, a primary strong power with weaker secondary powers. When it's just a 2-person cluster, it is non-common for there to be a third power included into the mix, just at random. Clusters tend to have the same types of powers, expressed differently from each other. An example of a cluster would be Precipice and Love Lost, who are part of a 4-person cluster. Precipice's primary power are energy swords that bypass durability, with secondary powers that are building robotic limbs, guilt-emotion aura, and inertia dampening movement. Love Lost's primary power is for rage emotion scream, building mechanical claws, gravity-defying movement, and empowering weapons to cut through durable targets. Alexandria packages. Alexandria packages are a notable subset of parahumans who have multiple powers that allow them to act as a classic trio of flight, strength, and invincibility powers. It should be noted that this is merely the base requirement, and that Alexandria packages can have extra powers or gimmicks beyond the 3 required. An example of this subset would be the famous Alexandria herself. She has high-speed flight, super strength, and has stasis-locked invincibility. Meanwhile, her gimmick is the ability to have enhanced cognitive processing for high-speed reaction times, perfect memory, and increased intelligence. Glory Girl, who happens to be the younger form of his avatar I'm using, is another Alexandria package, with flight, super strength, and durability granting skin-tight force field, with an emotional aura for awe or terror in allies or foes. It should be noted that while there are power sets that can emulate Alexandria packages in effect, such as certain cluster mixes, trumps, or tinker suits, Alexandria packages are separated by the fact they seem to occur naturally to a cape, without requiring clusters or external forces like trumps or tinker tech. Flying artillery. Flying artillery refers to parahumans who are capable of flying and having some form of blaster power. While not as strictly defined as clusters or Alexandria packages, there are numerous examples of parahumans who fit the description for this subcategory. An example of flying artillery would be Legend. He has the power of flight along with the ability to fire a near unlimited amount of lasers from his body at various distances. Monster parahumans, Case 53s. The unfortunately labeled monster parahumans tend to fall into 2 categories. The mutated deviations of artificially made parahumans dumped into alternate realities, known as Case 53s, and the occasionally unfortunate natural parahuman, where the power alters their body to some extent. These mutations can range from mild changes such as having feathers for hair, or as extreme as becoming a living tangle of doll parts. An example of a quote-unquote monster cape is Weld, a brute/changer, who has his entire physiology changed to that of various types of metals, along with the unfortunate side effect of absorbing any and all metal that comes into contact with his body, and weakened tactile sensations. While easily mistaken for parahumans who purposely use their powers to alter their appearance or aesthetics, or who can voluntarily enter a reality-breaking state. Monster capes generally have no control over their appearance and tend to have massive disabilities to go with their mutations. Empowered humans. It should be noted that this is not an official category. However, empowered humans best describes humans who have gained supernatural abilities without being a parahuman, though the cause of such will always be power-related. Empowered humans tend to occur when normal humans is, well, empowered, either briefly or permanently, though not always in beneficial capacities. These can be instances of trumps granting boons to minions, relatives being given power armor, or being exposed to power effects that alter their bodies and minds. One example of an empowered human would be Saint, an ordinary individual who happened to have some knack for hacking, that was turned into a computer genius after being empowered by another parahuman who can boost mental abilities at the cost of being loyal and having an addiction to the parahuman. Another example would be victims of lab rat, some of whom were left with inhuman mutations that granted them a superhuman strength or no need to sleep from his injections, at the cost of their sanity or other physical disabilities. Power threat ratings. Now that you know the power classifications and categories, it's time to understand the ratings. These are a numbered hierarchy going from 1 and up, though it is ever rare to ever see a power that is 10 or higher, that are used to classify the danger posed to a team of responding agents or heroes. It is important to note that power ratings are not power levels. They are a measure of threat and priority. A Brute 2 could conceivably beat a Thinker 7, or a Trump 1 might render a Shaker 12 useless. While some characters in-universe do make the mistake of treating them like power levels, that is an in-universe misconception as to their purpose. When rating a parahuman, it's called category number. In the case of multiple powers, it goes category/category number, or category number brackets category number, or category number, category number. One example used is Assault, who is a Striker 7. Another example would be Auroch, who is a Brute 2, Shaker 3, Striker 2, Mover 2. So, how do you rank parahumans? Category 1 poses a threat only just above human norms. An unexceptional individual may be able to cope with the ability or walk away unharmed from an altercation where the abilities in question were leveraged. The ability should be assumed to be a non-threat and need not be identified if other matters prove more pressing. Category 2. An alert, exceptional, well-equipped, and or trained individual should be able to answer or address the ability in question, but it can prove to be problematic. Team members are reminded of standard countermeasures and should put these measures in effect when there are no pressing other matters. Category 3. Civilians, even alert or fit civilians, will not be able to handle the ability or abilities in question. Several trained individuals may be required to deal with the situation. Care should be taken to remove civilians from the area and discourage them from participating. Category 4. One full squad of trained operatives should be able to deal with the situation alone, but exceptional circumstance, context, and environment may bias things one way or another. Category 5. Additional countermeasures come into effect. A typical parahuman or one parahuman assisting a squad of operatives should be able to deal with the power in question. Operatives can engage until assistance arrives. Category 6. A typical trained parahuman or one parahuman assisting a squad of operatives should be able to deal with the power in question. Operatives should postpone engagement. Parahumans and operatives should assume that traditional actions are going to be met by a complication. Acquiring further intel is recommended where possible but not mandated. Category 7. Parahumans should engage in pairs or trios at a minimum. 2 fully equipped squads should be deployed. Acquiring further intel is mandated. All acting parties should shift to defensive or delay until intel can be acquired. Category 8. Evacuation of civilians should take priority for all squad members. Engaging should be avoided outside of specific missions and tasks. Parahumans should engage only when supported by their team to ensure a minimum of complications or danger. Category 9. Assume extreme complications with standard tactics not applying or the power in question having an additional factor that exaggerates its effect. Parahumans and PRT should evacuate where possible and should only engage when a specific mission and strategy has been outlined. Major countermeasures should take effect. Author's note: PRT refers to Parahumans Response Teams. Category 10. In the event of a serious confrontation, additional teams or specific high-rated individuals should be called in to manage the crisis. Category 15. Planetary Threat. See S-Class. Class versus tiers. Speaking of, it is important that we differentiate between class threats and tiers of capes. When calling a parahuman an A tier cape or F tier cape, this is not indicative of power or threat, but rather the success they have in their career as a hero, villain, or rogue. While power and threat levels can be connected, this does not guarantee having a high tier label. For example, the villain Lord of Loss is mentioned as being an A-list tier because, despite not being a national or international player, such as a heroic triumvirate or a dragon, he had a solid reputation for getting jobs done and never losing a fight. Conversely, a cape like Frou Frou, with a strong minion power, is referred to as an F-tier cape due to her lack of control over power, terrible social behavior, and klutziness, such as undressing and smoking pot on a live stream by accident. The class threats refers to two known threat levels that require national or international concern. The A-class threats are parahumans, powers, or events that, while very destructive, do not necessarily cause major loss of life or infrastructure due to various limitations on the threat, such as the Ash Beast being slow enough for cities to evacuate before its arrival. The S-class threats are parahumans, powers, or events that threaten all of humanity and naturally incur huge amounts of loss of life and infrastructure. While they are not an immediate destruction of the planet, they have a potential for extinction, and some are capable of rapid reproduction, which can be literal or figurative reproduction. S-class without consciousness are sometimes referred to as S-class problems. There is one documented case of a Class SS threat, implied to be that of the Titan Valkyrie, due to her sheer power and number of powers to boot. And there you have it, the heavily summarized breakdown of powers in the Parahumans. What power categories would you want? How would you rate characters from other settings? Next time I'm hoping to cover the main character of the Parahumans book Worm, Taylor Hebert. Or was it Taylor Hebert? That's an argument for another day. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want more. Until next time, welcome to Parahumans.